The flowers were still cold when I realized I should not have come, that I was holding yellow roses in one hand and a pharmacy bag in the other, standing in a dim living room that smelled like vanilla candles instead of sickness. The television was on. Some judge show playing to an empty couch. And somewhere in the back of the house my granddaughter was laughing. Not the careful, quiet laugh of a child trying not to wake dying grandparents. The full, bright sound of a 2-year-old who does not have a care in the world, that I had driven 2 hours from Raleigh to Durham, because my daughter-in-law told me both her parents had pneumonia. She said her father could barely breathe. She said her mother would not eat. She said she did not know if they would make it through the week. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of my son calling me every night asking if I had heard anything. 3 days of him saying maybe I should drive down there, maybe she needs help, maybe I should take time off work, that I told him to wait. To let her focus on her parents. To give her space, that I did not tell him I was the one who could not wait. The front door had been unlocked. I let myself in the way you do, when someone is expecting you. Even though no one was. The living room looked lived in but not frantic. Magazines stacked on the coffee table. A pair of reading glasses. A coffee mug with a faded ring at the bottom. Things that belonged to people who were going about their normal day. Not people who were dying. I stood there listening to my granddaughter laugh, and tried to make the sound fit the story. Maybe they were keeping her away from the sick rooms. Maybe they were trying to keep things cheerful for her sake. Maybe I was wrong to feel this cold spread of doubt moving through my chest. But I have been a mother long enough to know what a house feels like when someone in it is dying. The hush. The smell of medicine and worry. The way normal things stop happening because there is no energy left for normal. This house did not feel like that. I walked toward the sound. Down a hallway lined with family photographs. School pictures in cheap frames. A wedding photo of her parents from 30 years ago. Her father in a brown suit. Her mother in cream lace. Both of them young and serious. At the end of the hall, I saw her father in military dress. Younger still. Before the marriage. Before the house with green shutters that he painted himself. I passed a bathroom. Door open. Light off. Clean towels folded on the counter. I passed a bedroom. Door closed. No sound behind it. The laughing got louder as I moved toward the back of the house. I could hear other voices now mixing with my granddaughter's. An adult woman. An adult man. Both of them sounding easy and warm. The kind of voices people use when they are comfortable. When they are home. I reached the last door on the left. It was cracked open just enough for me to see part of a bed. A blue and white quilt. Sunlight coming through a window that faced the backyard. I still did not know what I was about to find. But my hands were shaking when I pushed the door the rest of the way open. My daughter-in-law was sitting cross-legged on the bed wearing jeans and a gray sweater I had never seen before. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked rested. Next to her sat a man about 30 with his arm draped behind her on the headboard. On her other side was a woman the same age holding my granddaughter on her lap. They were all looking at a phone. Watching something together. Something that made all 3 of them smile. Nobody noticed me for 5 full seconds. 5 seconds where I stood in the doorway holding medicine for sick people who were not there. 5 seconds where I tried to fit what I was seeing into what I had been told. 5 seconds where my mind went to places I did not want it to go. Then my granddaughter looked up. She saw me. She said "Grandma" the way she always does. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for me to be standing there. My daughter-in-law stood up so fast the phone dropped onto the quilt. Her face changed. I watched the color drain out of it. Watched her mouth open without sound coming out. The man pulled his arm back. The woman holding my granddaughter looked from her to me and back again like she was trying to solve a problem she had just been handed. I said, "Where are your parents?" My voice came out flat. Like all the feeling had been pressed out of it. My daughter-in-law took a step toward me. She said, "I can explain." I held up the pharmacy bag. I said I brought medicine. I brought flowers for your mother. She said please just let me explain. But I could not stand in that doorway anymore with those three people staring at me, and my granddaughter looking confused. I turned and walked back down the hallway. I heard her following, saying my name, saying wait, saying it is not what you think. I wanted to believe that. I wanted there to be some explanation that would make this make sense. But I already knew. The way you know things before anyone says them out loud. The way your body knows before your mind catches up. I made it to the living room and set the flowers on the coffee table next to the magazines. Real simple. Southern living. Neat and current and not at all the reading material of people too sick to lift their heads. I kept holding the medicine bag because I did not know what else to do with it. She came in behind me breathing hard. She said I know you are upset. I did not turn around. I said are your parents sick? Silence. I said answer me. She said no. The word hung in the air between us. Small and final. I turned to face her. I said are they even here? She looked at the floor. At the television. At the flowers I had brought. Anywhere but at me. She said they are in Florida. They have been there since July. They are fine. I heard a clock ticking somewhere. A car passing outside. My own heartbeat pushing against my ribs. I said so you. Leet. She nodded once. Barely. I said why. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked back toward the hallway. She said because I needed time. I said time for what? She said time away. Time to think. Time to figure out what I am doing. Histoire here. This woman who called me mom 6 months after the wedding. Who cried when I gave her my grandmother's pie recipe. Who asked my advice about everything from paint colors to how to handle a fussy baby. I did not recognize her. I said does my son know you are here? She said no. I said does he know your parents are not sick? She said no. I said what does he think? She said he thinks what you thought. That I am taking care of them. That I will come home when they are better. Something cracked in my chest. Not my heart exactly. The place where you keep your trust. Where you store your assumptions about the people you love. I said how long were you planning to keep this going? She did not answer. I said a week? 2 weeks. Were you just going to stay here until you felt like coming back? She said I have not figured it out yet. My hands tightened on the pharmacy bag. The plastic crinkled. I said who are those people in the bedroom? She said friends. I said what kind of friends? She said just friends. People I have known for a long time. I said from before my son. She nodded. I wanted to ask if she had been planning this. If she had been talking to these people while she was still sleeping in my son's bed. Still kissing him goodbye in the morning. Still pretending everything was fine. But I could not make myself say the words. I was afraid of what her answer would be. I said I am taking my granddaughter home with me. She stepped between me and the hallway. She said no. I said yes. She said she is my daughter. I said she is my son's daughter. And he thinks she is here because your parents are dying. He has been calling you every night. Have you been answering those calls from this house? From that bedroom? With those people in the next room? Her face went red. She said you do not understand. I said then make me understand. She stood there. Mouth tight. Arms crossed. Looking trapped and angry and something else I could not name. Finally she said I needed a break. For words. Like they explained everything. I said everybody needs a break. You do not lie about your parents dying to get one. She said you do not know what it has been like. I said so tell me. She said I cannot. I said why not? She said because you will tell him. I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the bags under her eyes that I had mistaken for grief. But now saw were something else. At the way she held herself. Defensive. Guilty. Caught. I said if you are not ready to tell your husband the truth, Then you should not be doing whatever this is. She looked away. I picked up the flowers again. I do not know why. Maybe I needed something to hold. Maybe I could not stand to leave them there like an offering. I said I am going home. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to call my son, and tell him everything. If you do not, I will. She said that is not fair. I said fair? You want to talk to me about fair? She started crying. Not loud. Just tears running down her face while she stood there with her arms still crossed. Some part of me wanted to comfort her. Old habit. Mother instinct. But I pushed it down. I said 9 o'clock. I walked out. I got in my car and set the flowers on the passenger seat next to the medicine. I looked back at the house once. She was standing in the doorway. Not moving. Not waving. Just standing. I drove home and I did not cry. When I got home I sat at my kitchen table in the growing dark and called my son. He answered right away. He said, "Hey Mom. Any news?" I almost told him. The words were right there. Your wife is not where she said she would be. Your wife lied to both of us. Your wife is in Durham with people I do not know doing things I do not understand. But I had given her until 9 o'clock. So I swallowed the truth and said no news yet. Just checking in. He said I keep thinking I should drive down there. I said give it one more day. He talked about work for a while. About a project deadline. About how quiet the house was without his daughter's toys everywhere. Normal things. Things that would not be normal much longer. After we hung up I sat in the dark and waited. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw that bedroom. My granddaughter on a stranger's lap. My daughter-in-law looking rested and happy. The phone, they were all watching together. Like a family. Like they had done this before. At 8:30 the next morning my phone rang. Her. She said I told him. I said everything? Pause. She said most of it. I said that is not good enough. She said it is all I can do right now. I said what did you tell him? She said I told him my parents are not sick. I told him I needed time away. I told him I have been struggling. I said did you tell him about the people in the house? Silence. I said did you? She said I told him I was staying with friends. I said what did he say? She said he hung up. I closed my eyes. I said good. She said what? I said good. He should have hung up on you. She said I am trying to figure things out. I said then come home and figure them out with your husband. She said I cannot do that. I said why not? Long silence. Then she said because I do not know if I want to be married anymore. There it was. I should have known. But hearing her say it was different from suspecting it. I said does he know that? She said not yet. I said you need to tell him. She said I know. I said when? She said soon. I said that is not an answer. She did not respond. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Uneven. Like she was trying not to cry again. I said I am going to check on my son now. I hung up. I drove to his house. He was sitting on the front steps in his pajama pants and an old t-shirt even though it was almost 10 in the morning. He did not stand when I pulled up. Just looked at me with red eyes. I sat down next to him on the concrete. It was cold. The sun was out but it had not warmed anything yet. He said she called you too. I said yes. He said did she tell you the truth? I said some of it. Did she tell you? He said she told me her parents are not sick. She told me she has been lying. She told me she needed space. I said anything else? He shook his head. I waited. Then I said I went there yesterday. He looked at me. He said what? I said I drove to Durham. I brought flowers and medicine. I wanted to help. He said what did you find? I told him. Not all of it. But enough. The house that did not smell like sickness. The people in the bedroom. The way everyone looked comfortable and happy. The lie sitting in the middle of it all. When I finished he put his head in his hands. He said I do not understand what I did wrong. I said maybe nothing. He said then why? I said I do not know. Maybe she does not either. He said that is not good enough. I said no. It is not. We sat there. A woman jogged past with a dog. A truck drove by playing music too loud. Normal Tuesday morning things happening while my son's life fell apart. He said what should I do? I said I cannot tell you that. He said I am asking anyway. I thought about all the things I wanted to say. About commitment. About vows. About fighting for your marriage. But none of it felt right sitting there on those cold steps. So I said wait. He said for what? I said for her to decide what she wants. And while you wait you decide what you want. Not what you think you should want. What you actually want. He said I want my family. I said maybe. Or maybe you want a wife who does not run away when things get hard. Maybe you want someone you can trust. Maybe you want a lot of things you have not let yourself think about. He looked at me like I had just said something in a foreign language. I said I am not telling you to leave. I am not telling you to stay. I am telling you to think. He nodded slowly. I stayed until early afternoon. Made him eat something. Cleaned the kitchen because I needed something to do with my hands. When I left he was sitting on the couch staring at a photograph from last Christmas. The three of them in matching pajamas. Everyone smiling. I wondered if he was trying to remember when her smile stopped being real. She came back 2 weeks later. Not to stay. To talk. She called first. My son said yes. I do not know what he hoped would happen. Maybe an explanation that made sense. Maybe an apology that changed something. He told me about it the next day. He said she looked tired. He said she cried a lot. He said she told him she loved him but did not know if that was enough anymore. She wanted counseling. He said he would think about it. That was 3 months ago. They are still thinking. She lives in an apartment near Durham now. He has our granddaughter most of the time. I help when I can. We have a routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays I pick her up from daycare. We go to the park if the weather is good. We stay inside and read if it is not. She asks about her mama sometimes. I tell her mama is working. Mama loves her. Mama will see her soon. Small truths. I do not know what will happen. Maybe they will work it out. Maybe they will not. Maybe one day I will look back and understand something I cannot see now. But I think about that day often. Walking into that house with flowers for people who were not sick. The sound of laughter coming from a room I did not expect. The 5 seconds before my granddaughter saw me. The 5 seconds when I still believed what I had been told. That is what I remember most. Not the discovery. Not the conversation after. The moment right before. When the lie was still working. When I still trusted that the people I loved were telling me the truth. I still have the medicine bag. It is in my hall closet next to the winter coats. I see. It sometimes when I am reaching for a jacket. I keep meaning to throw it out or use it. But I have not done either. It just sits there. A small strange monument to the day I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you know the least. The flowers died on my kitchen table. I let them. Watched them go brown and drop their petals one by one. My son asked me once why I kept them so long. I told him I did not know. But that was not true. I kept them because they reminded me of something important. That you can bring all the medicine and all the flowers in the world. But you cannot fix someone who does not want to be fixed. You cannot save someone who is already gone. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old. I started sharing these stories because I thought maybe someone else needed to hear them. Maybe someone else is standing in a house that does not smell right. Maybe someone else is holding flowers that nobody needs. If that is you, I want to say this. Trust what your body tells you. Trust the feeling in your chest when something does not fit. You are not wrong. You are not imagining it. And whatever you find when you open that door, You will survive it. I did.